Hey everybody, Jane here, and today I want to talk to you about Thunderhead. This is the sequel to Scythe. And in Scythe, we had a world where people no longer die, and two teenagers have become apprentice scythes who are the people in charge of keeping the population down and selecting those who will be gleaned, since people no longer die naturally. A lot of stuff happened in the first book, and I'm about to spoil some of that by talking about the plot of this book. But before I do that, I'll just say I really loved the first book. Scythe was good. It was a 4 out of 5 for me. Would highly recommend it as a standalone because this book here, the sequel, was a complete dumpster fire in my opinion, and I gave it a 2 out of 5. So, Scythe good, Thunderhead not good. And I should say this book was good until the last 75 pages. And then I wanted to throw it. And I don't plan to continue because I don't think it's fixable. But let me go on to what this book is about. Again, this will spoil Scythe a little bit because it will talk about the ending of Scythe and how we got to Thunderhead. So if you haven't read Scythe and would like to, you might want to wait on this review until you've read Scythe. Otherwise, let's just get into it. So at the end of Scythe, you had Rowan and Citra, who it was determined Citra was going to become a scythe and Rowan wasn't. She was supposed to kill him. She didn't. They're supposed to glean him. She didn't. Instead, she granted him immunity, and he ran off and became Scythe Lucifer, who's killing the bad scythes. So far, so good. Citra has given herself the name of Scythe Anastasia, but I think it's just going to be easier for me to keep referring to her as Citra, and she is with Scythe Curry, who was training her in the last book. And so she's a Scythe now. And I really love, I will say this, I love Citra's way of gleaning. So we do get to see where she's at and, what she's doing with her gleaning. As we start to enter this book, we know what's going on with Rowan and that he's still doing the Scythe Lucifer stuff and trying to kind of get rid of the bad scythes. Citra has an influence on the scythedom. I'll be really honest, I don't understand why. But at one point early in this book, Faraday says to Rowan that, he's not doing anything efficient by killing bad scythes, but that Anastasia will have more influence on the scythes, like the borderline scythes, and the scythedom because she is a famous scythe now. So, as we enter this, Citra is kind of a minor celebrity. Rowan is killing bad scythes. Faraday's still playing dead. And Curry is with Citra doing the scythe thing. There is, early on in this book, an attempt on Citra and Curry's lives. And, of course, everybody assumes it's Scythe Lucifer, or Rowan, but we know, of course, that Rowan would never try to hurt Citra. So we, the reader, know something else is going on. Additionally, we are informed that the Thunderhead knows what's going on and really can't do anything about it. So the Thunderhead kind of pushes a kid whose name is Tolliver. Godric Tolliver? I think. Tolliver is what I'm going to call him. To get involved because the Thunderhead can't. So you have a lot of different things happening in different perspectives. You have all the Grayson is his name. Grayson Tolliver. You have Grayson's perspective. You have Citra and what's going on with her. You have Rowan and what's going on with him. And then you also have, in the book Scythe, you had all of these journal entries by old scythes. In this, we just have the thoughts, if you can call them thoughts, musings of the Thunderhead itself. And I actually overall enjoyed the beginning of this book. I did feel like Grayson Tolliver was getting a little bit too much screen time, if you will, or page time. He was not as interesting to me, and I wasn't as attached to him as Citra and Rowan. And of course, Citra and Rowan are not in the same vicinity a large portion of this book, so you miss that chemistry and that friendship, and there was a lot of things that I wasn't loving going into this book. But I was okay with it. And then the last 75 pages hit, and this turned into a complete freaking dumpster fire for me. And I don't think I'll be reading The Toll. I was like wondering if I could read The Toll and if it would make it better. But I talked to a friend who's read The Toll, and she said, if you didn't like Thunderhead and I hated this book, don't continue. So I think I'm going to hard pass on Toll. I will say, because I'm going to spoil this later, but not yet, in case anybody wants my thoughts on what went wrong, but doesn't want like real explicit detail. The end of this book, to me, went way off the rails. To the point that I kind of felt like the author had turned in an April Fool's joke to his publisher, and the publisher was like, oh yes, we're at deadline. Let's just put that in. It's fine. And that's kind of how off the rails the plot went. So my big issues is that the last 75 pages of this book, the plot just takes off in a crazy off the rails place. And not only did I not like where it went, but I felt like there was so many ways we could have gotten there that were less off the rails and crazy, and that wouldn't have ruined my reading experience. And again, this is a personal opinion. I'm sure there were people that read that and thought, well, that's something we haven't seen before. That's quite unusual. Okay. I couldn't do that. I couldn't do that. To me, this is really an upsetting read. And as I mentioned, one of my most disappointing of the year, I think this will have to go on my most disappointing of the year books, because it was just so not what I wanted from this book. So, I am going to spoil the plot of this. In case anybody doesn't want to hear the spoilers, please hop off now. Otherwise, I'm going to tell you why this book sucked so much. And I'm super salty about it. Yeah, absolutely 100%. So, I was having a good time with this book. A little too much Grayson. Not enough Citra and Rowan. But, Citra's way of gleaning is pretty cool, and her and Curry are cool, and I like their dynamic. And everything was going okay. And then the bad guy from Scythe gets resurrected, and Goddard is back. So, halfway through the book, and this is kind of where I started having some issues with the book, Goddard's head and brain, presumably, were preserved, and Tiger, who was Rowan's friend from book 1, is killed, and Goddard's head is put on Tiger's body. And I guess that wasn't too off the rails, because we know they have all kinds of crazy technology. Even though it's not meant to be used that way, why not? But I felt like that was a really cheap trick. I didn't love that trick. And things kind of go downhill from there. So, the Scythe who has the little girl from the first book, the Scythe who is the father, and he's like the High Scythe or something, he comes to the gathering of Scythes, and he says, hey, the conclave. And he says, hey, I am being promoted. I'm going to basically become part of the Supreme Court of Scythes. So, promotion. And then the question is, well, who's going to take his place? And initially, Curry is as uh, voted as one of the candidates. And then Goddard shows up and says, I want to be a candidate. So they agree to take a vote, but just before the results are announced, Citra says, hey, he's not really Goddard anymore. He's Goddard's head on Tiger's body. And that's a problem because, Tiger wasn't a scythe. So is Goddard even a scythe if just his head is a scythe? His body's not a scythe. And all the vigorous training and stuff we go through, he probably shouldn't be a scythe because, good reasons. So Goddard and Curry and Citra have to go to this island where the Supreme Court of Scythe basically will determine whether Goddard can become a scythe or become the Supreme Scythe because he is now just the head of the person who became a scythe to begin with. So right there, that's kind of weird, but I was still okay with things at this point. And here's the thing, I can't even say that the stuff that leads up to what happens next isn't foreshadowed, because it's foreshadowed. It just seemed so stupidly ridiculous that I didn't care that it was foreshadowed, or that stuff was like, okay, yeah, they did say that was going to happen, or that could happen, or that was possible. No, it got stupid. So, Goddard and Curry go to the Supreme Council of Scythes, and the Supreme Council's like, yeah, Goddard, you are a head of a scythe and the body of a non-scythe, so you cannot become the leader of the scythedom in North America. You have to, as a matter of fact, to retain your scythehood, go and apprentice again. Goddard is not happy, but he knew that could happen. So he has devised a plan to destroy the freaking scythedom. He then proceeds to sink the island they're on and make they're not robotic because they're actual sharks, but sharks under the influence of computer programming eat everybody. Everybody. So basically, this book ends with a shark attack where robotic sharks, sort of robotic, computer-influenced sharks eat everybody. Now, if you're wondering, Rowan was on the island. He kind of warned them this was going to happen, and him and Citra are sort of saved. They are placed in like a preserving chamber where they will be resurrectable, assuming they're found and assuming the sharks can't get in. Like, they're put in a shark tight place, so they're going to die, but they can be resurrected for the next book. But everybody else got eaten by sharks. So the Supreme Court of Scythes got eaten by sharks. Madame Curry got eaten by sharks. All the scythes that are on this island, because this is like a big scythe getaway, got eaten by sharks. All the civilians in this island, and I'm guessing it's a fairly large island, like the size of one of the Hawaiian Islands, get eaten by sharks. Like, everybody gets eaten by sharks. And I couldn't. It was so crazy. I was like, how is this happening? How? Why? Why did we do this? Did we have nothing else? Did we write ourselves in a corner where we're like, I'm not sure what's happening, so I'm just gonna make sharks eat everybody? That I just don't have an explanation for why this book ended up the way it did, and I feel like that should have, like, an editor somewhere should have been like, maybe that's not the way to go with this. Maybe having everyone eaten by sharks is not the right move. But I am not the editor, nor am I the author. I'm just a reader who was quite upset and taken aback by all the craziness. And then to top it all off, the Thunderhead screams, which has the Tonus thinking that they're hearing their Tony God thing. And the Thunderhead goes silent and won't talk to anybody except for Grayson Tolliver, who he wasn't talking to before. Or who the Thunderhead, the Thunderhead, I guess, is probably genderless, wasn't talking to before because Grayson had gotten into some trouble and was technically an outlaw by helping the Thunderhead. And this whole book was just such a clusterfuck by the end of it that I was like, I don't know what they could do in the Toll to fix this. And so that's why I even asked my friend who read it. I was like, if I hated everything that happened, I thought the bringing Goddard back was cheap. And ending this book with a shark attack for me was off the rails, crazy, and not a satisfying ending for this. Should I even read the next one? And she told me no. So, those are my thoughts on Thunderhead. I do recommend reading Scythe. Scythe was good. Thunderhead, I think if you can read Scythe and be fine with reading it as a single standalone book, it's a good book. I really enjoyed it, and I think it is a good standalone. I don't think you're missing anything by not moving on to the second book. So, if you are thinking about reading Thunderhead and are on the fence, if a massive shark attack that kills all the Scythes isn't how you want the book to end, maybe skip this one. I feel like it was skippable. I am actually a little sad that I read this. I really feel like it actually in some ways tarnished the first book. Because I really love the first book, and I feel like all the crazy zaniness almost makes it so that I can't have as good a memory of that first book. It's like, oh, good first book. And it wasn't even like a little bit of not as good as the rest. Because, I think that happens. Like the Hunger Game books. I really liked the first book. The others in the series were okay. They added to things. They weren't my favorites, though. I really like the Hunger Games the best of the Hunger Games series. But I didn't feel like the after books tarnished the first book. Whereas with this book, I feel like, you know what? This kind of in some ways ruins book one for me. So I'm really kind of sad about that. So yeah, that has been my thoughts on Thunderhead. What did you think if you read Thunderhead? Did you like it? Did you hate it? Were you indifferent about it? Did you think the ending was amazing and something, completely just unexpected and a great way to handle things? Or did you feel more like I felt and thought that it was kind of a cheap ploy that you didn't enjoy? Please let me know your thoughts on Thunderhead. And, if you had thoughts about the Toll, if you felt that the Toll redeemed the second book, or if you felt like, no, if you hated the second book, don't bother. Don't bother going on with the Toll because it's just more of the same. So please leave your comments on that below. I'm Jane, and my social media is below. And also in that social media is a list of the books I've written. If you enjoy romance, please check me out. Have a good day. Thank you. Bye.